Jake Morrison stared at the tactical display in front of him, watching the red dots move closer to his position. The simulation room was dark, except for the glowing screens that showed the enemy fleet approaching. Around him, his fellow cadets worked at their stations, following every rule they had learned at the Terran Space Academy. "Enemy ships are moving into attack formation," called out Cadet Bobby Chen from the communication station. His voice was steady, just like the training manual said it should be. "All ships, take defensive positions," ordered Cadet Lisa Park, who was acting as squadron leader for this exercise. She was the top student in their class, always following orders perfectly. Jake looked at the enemy formation and frowned. The red dots were arranged in a pattern he had seen before. It was the same attack formation that the Catherian Empire used in every battle. The Academy taught students to respond with a specific defensive strategy. Form up in a line, create overlapping fire zones, and hold position until reinforcements arrived. But Jake had studied the real battle reports. This defensive strategy had failed every single time humans had tried it against the Catherians. Every single time, the human ships were destroyed while following the rules. "Jake, move your fighter group to Sector 7, Lisa ordered through the radio. "Form defensive line with the other squadrons." Jake's hands moved over his controls. But he didn't follow the order. Instead, he studied the enemy movement patterns. The Catherians always attacked the same way. They moved forward in perfect formation, hit the center of the human line, then spread out to surround the remaining ships. It worked because humans always responded the same way. "Jake, what are you doing?" Lisa's voice came through the radio again. "You're not in position." "I'm thinking," Jake replied. Still watching the enemy ships dock in the observation booth above the simulation room, Commander Lisa Harper watched the exercise with interest. She had been teaching at the academy for 10 years, and she had never seen a cadet hesitate like this during a major simulation. "That Morrison kid is going to fail again," said Admiral Ben Clark, standing beside her. "He never follows the program." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Commander Harper replied quietly. "Down." In the simulation room, Jake made his decision. Instead of moving to the defensive line, he turned his fighter squadron away from the main battle. The other cadets watched in shock as Jake's ships moved toward empty space. "Morrison, return to formation immediately," Lisa commanded. "You're leaving us exposed." Jake ignored her. He had noticed something in the enemy formation that the training programs never mentioned. There was always a gap in the Catherian rearguard, a small opening where their command ships had less protection. The Academy taught that attacking through this gap was suicide because it meant flying through the entire enemy fleet, but Jake had a different idea. "All fighters in my group, follow my lead," Jake said into his radio. "We're going around." "Around where?" asked Cadet Danny Price, who was flying Jake's wing position. "Trust me," Jake replied. The main battle began as Jake's squadron flew away from the fight. Lisa's defensive line met the Catherian attack exactly as the training manual predicted. The enemy ships hit the center of the human formation and began to spread out. On the tactical display, blue dots representing human ships started disappearing one by one. "Morrison, get back here now," Lisa called out. Her voice was no longer steady. "We're losing ships." Jake didn't answer. His squadron was now behind the enemy fleet, approaching the gap he had spotted. The Catherian command ships were there, just as he expected. In every real battle, these command ships coordinated the entire enemy attack. If they were destroyed, the perfect Catherian formation would fall apart. "All fighters, attack the command ships," Jake ordered. "Ignore everything else. That's suicide," Danny protested. "There are too many enemy ships around them." "Do it anyway," Jake said. Jake's squadron dove toward the Catherian command ships. Enemy fighters turned to intercept them, but Jake had timed the attack perfectly. Most of the Catherian fleet was busy with the main battle and couldn't respond. Fast enough, the first command ship exploded under Jake's attack, then the second one. Suddenly, the organized Catherian formation began to break apart. Without their command ships, the enemy fighters couldn't coordinate their attacks. "What's happening?" Lisa called out from the main battle. "The enemy formation is collapsing." Jake's squadron continued attacking. They hit the supply ships next, then the heavy cruisers that were supposed to protect the command vessels. The entire enemy fleet began to retreat in confusion. Within 10 minutes, the simulation was over. The Catherian fleet was destroyed, and most of the human ships survived. It was the first time in Academy history that cadets had achieved a complete victory in this particular scenario. The simulation room went quiet. The other cadets stared at their screens, not understanding what had just happened. They had been trained to expect defeat in this exercise. Victory was not supposed to be possible. "Exercise complete," announced the computer. "Human forces achieved total victory. Enemy casualties, 100%. Human casualties, 15%. Lisa Park turned around in her chair to look at Jake. Her face showed a mixture of anger and confusion. "You disobeyed direct orders," she said. "You left the formation when we needed you most." "I won the battle," Jake replied simply. "You got lucky," Lisa shot back. "What you did was against every rule we've learned." Jake shrugged. "The rules don't work. I've read the real battle reports. Every time we follow the defensive strategy, we lose. Every single time." In the observation booth, Commander Harper and Admiral Clark watched the cadets argue. The Admiral shook his head in disapproval. "Morrison will never make it as an officer," Clark said. "He can't follow orders." "But he can win battles," Harper replied. "Look at those results. 15%. Casualties for a total victory. I've never seen anything like it." "It was a fluke," Clark insisted. "In real combat, his recklessness would get everyone killed." Commander Harper didn't reply, but she kept watching Jake through the observation window. The young cadet was explaining his tactics to the other students, using hand gestures to show how he had identified the weakness in the enemy formation. Later that day, Jake sat alone in the academy cafeteria. Most of the other cadets avoided him. They thought he was dangerous, unpredictable. His instructors gave him low marks for following orders, even when his tactics worked. "Mind if I sit here?" a voice asked. Jake looked up to see Captain Alex Stone, a man he had never met before. The captain wore the uniform of the Deep Space Fleet, with ribbons that showed he had seen real combat. "Sure," Jake replied. Captain Stone sat down across from Jake and studied him for a moment. "I watched your simulation today," he said. "Interesting approach." "My instructors didn't think so," Jake said. "Your instructors have never fought the Catherians in real combat," Stone replied. "I have, 3 times. Lost good people every time because we followed the book." Jake looked up with interest. "And? Your attack today, the way you went after their command ships? That might actually work in a real battle." Stone leaned forward. "How would you like to find out?" "What do you mean?" "I command an experimental ship called the Endeavor. We're heading to the Zarian sector, where a real Catherian fleet is gathering. The colony there has maybe 2 weeks before they attack." Jake felt his heart beating faster. "You want me to come with you?" "I want you to show me if your tactics work when real lives are on the line," Stone said. "But I have to warn you, this isn't a simulation. If you're wrong, people die. If you're right, you might just save humanity's newest colony." Jake didn't hesitate. "When do we leave?" Captain Stone smiled. "Tomorrow morning." "Pack light and Morrison?" "Yes." "Sir, in the Zarian sector, there won't be any safety protocols. No do-overs, no second chances. Are you ready for that?" Jake thought about all the battle reports he had read, all the human colonies that had fallen to Catherian attacks, all the times following the rules had led to defeat. "I'm ready," he said. That night, Jake packed his few belongings and prepared to leave the academy. He didn't know that his decision would change the course of galactic history. He only knew that somewhere in the universe, humans were dying because they followed rules that didn't work. Tomorrow he would find out if being different was enough to make a difference. The Endeavor was unlike any ship Jake had ever seen. Where Academy training vessels were clean and organized, this experimental warship looked like it had been built for war. Dark metal corridors led to weapon systems that Jake couldn't identify. The crew moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen real combat. Captain Stone led Jake through the ship's main corridor. "Welcome to the real fleet, Morrison," he said. "Out here, we don't have the luxury of following textbook strategies." They entered the bridge, where officers worked at control stations surrounded by displays showing star maps and enemy positions. A woman with short brown hair turned to greet them. "This is Lieutenant Amy Foster, my tactical officer," Stone said. "Foster, meet our new strategic advisor." Foster looked Jake up and down with obvious disapproval. "He's just a cadet, sir." "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Stone replied. "Morrison, Foster will brief you on our current situation." Jake followed Foster to a large display screen that showed the Zarian system. Red symbols marked enemy positions, while blue symbols showed human forces. The red symbols heavily outnumbered the blue ones. "The Catherian Empire has gathered a fleet of 200 ships," Foster explained. "They're positioned at the edge of the system, preparing for a final assault on Zarian colony. We have 37 ships to defend the colony. What's our strategy?" Jake asked. "Standard defensive formation," Foster replied. "We'll form a defensive line between the enemy fleet and the colony. Hold position and try to inflict maximum damage before they break through." Jake studied the display. "That won't work. The Catherians have too many ships. They'll just surround our defensive line and destroy us piece by piece. It's the best we can do with the forces we have," Foster said sharply. "Unless you have a better idea." Before Jake could answer, an alarm sounded throughout the ship. Captain Stone's voice came over the intercom. "All hands to battle stations. Catherian advance force detected. This is not a drill." Jake followed Foster to the bridge where the crew was preparing for combat. On the main screen, he could see a group of enemy ships approaching the outer system. They moved in perfect formation, just like in the Academy simulations. "Incoming transmission from Admiral Patricia Cole aboard the flagship Determination," the communications officer announced. The main screen switched to show a stern-faced woman in Admiral's uniform. "All ships, this is Admiral Cole. Form up on my position. We'll establish a defensive line at coordinates 77 Alpha and hold the enemy advance force." Jake watched as the human ships moved into position. They formed a straight line, just like the textbook said they should. The Catherian ships continued their approach, still in perfect formation. "They're going to hit our center and then spread out," Jake said quietly to Captain Stone. "I know," Stone replied. "But orders are orders." The battle began exactly as Jake had predicted. The Catherian ship struck the center of the human defensive line with overwhelming force. Human ships started exploding one by one as the enemy formation spread out to attack from multiple angles. "Admiral Cole's ship is taking heavy damage," the communications officer reported. "She's requesting immediate assistance." Jake watched the tactical display as the human formation began to collapse. Admiral Cole's flagship was surrounded by enemy vessels, its shields failing under constant attack. "Captain," Jake said urgently, "we need to help them." "Our orders are to maintain position," Stone replied. But Jake could see the conflict in his eyes. "The orders are wrong," Jake said. "Look at the display. In 5 minutes, there won't be anyone left to follow orders." On the screen, Admiral Cole's ship was now dead in space, its engines destroyed. Enemy ships were closing in for the final attack. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He turned to the weapons officer. "Can you target the Catherian command ship?" "Yes, but it's protected by escort vessels," the officer replied. "What are you doing, Morrison?" Foster demanded. "Saving lives," Jake replied. He turned to Captain Stone. "Sir, request permission to launch an unauthorized rescue mission." Stone looked at the tactical display, then at Jake. "Permission denied. We have our orders." Jake nodded, then walked over to the fighter bay controls. "Then I'll do it myself." "Morrison, stop," Foster called out, but Jake was already entering. "Commands into the system. Launching all fighters," Jake announced. "Any pilot who wants to follow me, now's your chance." The fighter bay doors opened, and Jake's fighter shot out into space. Behind him, he heard other fighters launching. Some of the pilots were following him, disobeying orders just as he was. "Morrison, return to the ship immediately," Captain Stone's voice came through the radio. "That's a direct order." "Sorry, Captain," Jake replied. "But I've seen this battle before. I know how it ends if we follow the rules." Jake's small fighter squadron flew toward the battle zone. The Catherian ships were focused on destroying Admiral Cole's flagship and didn't notice the approaching. "Fighters at first. All fighters target the enemy escort ships," Jake commanded. "We're going to create a hole in their formation." "There are too many of them," one of the other pilots protested. "We'll never make it through." "We don't need to make it through," Jake replied. "We just need to create enough chaos to get the Admiral's ship out of there." Jake's fighters struck the Catherian escort ships from an unexpected angle. Instead of trying to fight their way through the enemy formation, Jake had his pilots attack and then immediately retreat, drawing the enemy ships away from their positions. The Catherian commanders were confused by this tactic. They were used to enemies who fought in organized formations, not fighters that struck randomly and then disappeared. Their perfect battle plan began to fall apart as ships broke formation to chase Jake's fighters. "Now," Jake called out, "hit the command ship while they're distracted." Jake's fighter dove toward the Catherian command vessel. Its shields were down because all the escort ships had moved away to chase the other fighters. Jake's weapons tore through the command ship's hull, causing massive explosions. With their command ship destroyed, the Catherian advance force lost coordination. Ships that had been moving in perfect formation suddenly seemed confused, unsure of what to do next. "All ships, the enemy is retreating." Admiral Cole's voice came through the radio. Her ship was badly damaged but still functional. "Repeat, the enemy is retreating." Jake's unauthorized rescue mission had worked. The Catherian advance force was pulling back, giving the human fleet time to regroup and rescue survivors. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The main Catherian fleet was still out there, and they would learn from this encounter. Next time, they would be ready for human unpredictability. Jake returned to the Endeavor to find Captain Stone waiting for him in the fighter bay. The captain's face was stern, but there was something else in his eyes. "Respect, maybe. You disobeyed direct orders," Stone said. "Yes, sir," Jake replied. "You endangered the mission by acting without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You broke about 15 different regulations and nearly caused a diplomatic incident with Admiral Cole." Jake nodded. "Yes, sir." Stone was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You also saved 200 lives and gave us our first victory against a Catherian fleet in over a year. What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now you're confined to quarters while I figure out whether to recommend you for a medal or a court-martial." Stone replied. "But Morrison?" "Yes, sir." "That thing you did out there, attacking from an unexpected angle and then retreating to create confusion? I want you to write a report on it, every detail. Because I think you might have just discovered something the Catherians have never seen before." That night, Jake sat in his small quarters writing his report. Through the small window, he could see the stars of the Zerian system. Somewhere out there, the main Cytherian fleet was preparing for their final attack. They had overwhelming numbers and perfect tactics that had conquered half the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Jake finished his report and sent it to Captain Stone. Then he lay down on his narrow bunk and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, and new chances to prove that sometimes the best way to win was to ignore everything you had been taught about how to fight. In the distance, enemy ships moved through the darkness, their commanders struggling to understand what had happened to their perfect formation. For the first time in their military history, the Cytherians had encountered an enemy that didn't make sense, and that was exactly what Jake Morrison had been counting on. 3 weeks after the Zerian battle, Jake found himself standing in front of a military review board on Earth. The room was filled with high-ranking officers who had spent their careers following regulations and procedures. They did not look happy. Cadet Morrison, Admiral Patricia Cole began, her voice cold and formal. "You are charged with disobeying direct orders, endangering military personnel, and conducting unauthorized combat operations." Jake stood at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "Yes, ma'am. Your actions at Zerian were reckless and could have resulted in catastrophic losses," Cole continued. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" "I saved lives, ma'am," Jake replied simply. "You got lucky," Cole shot back. "In real warfare, your kind of behavior gets people killed." Before Jake could respond, the doors to the hearing room opened. Captain Stone entered, followed by a man Jake didn't recognize. The stranger wore the uniform of a general, with more ribbons and medals than Jake had ever seen on one person. "General Lucas Grant," Cole said, standing up. "We weren't expecting you." "I needed to see this hearing for myself," Grant replied. He looked at Jake with interest. "So you're the cadet who's been causing all the trouble?" "Sir," Jake said, unsure how to respond. Grant turned to address the review board. "I've spent the last 3 weeks reading reports about the Zerian battle. I've also been studying intelligence reports from across human space. The Cytherians are advancing on 12 different fronts, and our traditional tactics are failing everywhere." "General," Cole interjected, "this hearing is about military discipline, not tactical theory." "Is it?" Grant asked. "Because from where I stand, this young man just gave us our first real victory against the Cytherians. Maybe instead of punishing him, we should be learning from him." The room fell silent. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. A general was defending his actions in front of the review board. Grant continued, "I've been authorized by Earth Command to form a new unit, something we're calling the Wildcard Squadron. It will be composed of pilots and officers who think differently, who can adapt to changing situations without waiting for orders." "You want to reward insubordination?" Cole asked. "I want to win this war," Grant replied. "And Morrison's tactics at Zerian suggest there might be a way to do that." Jake felt his heart racing. "Sir, are you offering me a position?" "I'm offering you a chance to prove that your methods work on a larger scale," Grant said. "But I'm also warning you that this won't be like the Academy. You'll be dealing with real combat, real consequences, and real responsibility for the lives of your squadron." The review board dismissed the charges against Jake, but he could see the disapproval in their eyes. They thought he was dangerous, unpredictable. Maybe they were right. 2 days later, Jake found himself on a transport ship heading to a secret military base in the asteroid belt. The base was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid, invisible to enemy sensors. It was here that General Grant was assembling his new squadron. Jake's new teammates were unlike any military personnel he had ever met. Danny Price was a fighter pilot who had been court-martialed twice for ignoring orders. Nina Brooks was an explosives expert who had been transferred out of 3 different units for being too aggressive. Tony Garcia was a former smuggler who had joined the military to avoid prison time. Megan Phillips was a communications officer who had been disciplined for intercepting enemy transmissions without authorization. "Welcome to the Misfits," Danny said when Jake arrived at the base. "We're the pilots nobody else wants to work with." "Why did you all volunteer for this?" Jake asked. "Because we're tired of losing," Nina replied. "Every battle we fight, we follow the rules and get our people killed. Maybe it's time to try something different." General Grant gathered the squadron in a briefing room carved out of solid rock. The walls were covered with star charts and battle reports from across human space. "The situation is getting worse," Grant began. "The Catherians have taken 4 more colonies in the past month. Our traditional fleet formations are no match for their superior numbers and coordination." He pointed to a large display showing the Centauri system. "This is our next target. The largest coalition fleet ever assembled is preparing to make a stand at the Centauri Gateway. If we lose this battle, the Catherians will have a clear path to Earth itself." Jake studied the display. The human fleet was impressive, but the Catherian force approaching Centauri was 3 times larger. "What's our mission?" Tony asked. "You'll be attached to Admiral Scott Turner's fleet as a special operations unit," Grant explained. "Your job is to support the main battle plan and provide tactical flexibility." "Support the main battle plan?" Jake asked. "What if the main battle plan is wrong?" Grant looked at him seriously. "Then you'll have to make some difficult decisions. But remember, this isn't a simulation. If you're wrong, thousands of people die." The journey to Centauri took 5 days. Jake spent the time studying the enemy fleet movements and trying to understand their attack patterns. The Catherians were bringing their most advanced ships, including massive command vessels that could coordinate attacks across the entire battlefield. When they arrived at Centauri, Jake was amazed by the size of the human fleet. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different colonies had gathered to make their stand. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. Admiral Turner's flagship was a massive battleship called the Indomitable. Jake and his squadron were assigned quarters on the ship, but they were kept separate from the regular crew. The other officers looked at them with suspicion and distrust. "They think we're going to cause trouble," Megan observed. "They're probably right," Danny replied with a grin. The battle began at dawn on the 3rd day. Jake watched from the Indomitable's bridge as the Catherian fleet approached in perfect formation. They moved like a single organism, every ship in exactly the right position. Admiral Turner's strategy was textbook perfect. The human fleet formed a defensive line with heavy battleships in the center and faster cruisers on the flanks. It was exactly what the military academies taught as the proper response to a superior enemy force. "All ships maintain formation," Turner ordered. "Fire on my command." The 2 fleets met in a massive exchange of weapons fire. The space between them lit up with explosions and energy beams. For a moment, it seemed like the human line might hold dot, then the Catherian formation began to change. Instead of attacking head-on, they split into smaller groups that attacked from multiple angles. The human defensive line, designed to stop a frontal assault, was helpless against this coordinated multi-directional attack. "Sir," Jake said to Admiral Turner, "they're going to break through our center." "Hold position," Turner ordered. "Reinforcements are coming." But Jake could see on the tactical display that there were no reinforcements. The Catherian attack was perfectly timed and coordinated. They had studied human tactics and found the weakness in every defensive strategy. "Admiral," Jake said urgently, "we need to change our approach." "You're here as an observer, Morrison," Turner replied sharply. "Leave the tactics to experienced officers." Jake watched in horror as the human fleet began to fall apart. Ships were exploding all around them, and the Catherian formation was tightening like a noose around the remaining vessels. "Danny," Jake said quietly into his radio, "get the squadron ready." "Jake, we don't have orders," Danny replied. "I'm giving you orders," Jake said. "We're going to try something different." Jake turned to Admiral Turner. "Sir, request permission to launch a special operation." "Denied," Turner replied. "All units will maintain formation." Jake looked at the tactical display one more time. In 10 minutes, the entire human fleet would be destroyed. Following orders would mean the death of thousands of people and the fall of Earth itself. He made the decision that would define the rest of the war. "Wildcard Squadron, launch immediately," Jake commanded. "All pilots, ignore standard attack. Patterns. We're going to show these aliens what chaos looks like." "Morrison, stand down," Turner ordered. "You're relieved of duty." But Jake was already running toward the fighter bay, his squadron behind him. They had trained for this moment, and they knew what they had to do. As Jake's fighter launched into the battle zone, he could hear Admiral Turner's voice on the radio, ordering him to return. But Jake wasn't listening anymore. He was focused on the Catherian command ships, the heart of their perfect formation. It was time to find out if human chaos could defeat alien order. Jake's fighter squadron tore through the space between the two fleets like bullets fired from chaos itself. Behind them, Admiral Turner's carefully organized battle line was collapsing as Catherian ships picked apart the human formation piece by piece. "All fighters, target the command ships," Jake ordered through his radio. "Ignore everything else. We break their coordination, we break their entire attack. There are hundreds of enemy fighters between us and those command ships." Danny Price called back. "We'll never make it through." "We're not going through," Jake replied. "We're going around, under, over, and sideways. Confuse them. Make them think we're crazy." Jake dove his fighter toward a group of Catherian escort vessels, then suddenly changed direction and flew straight up. Behind him, Nina Brooks attacked a different group, then immediately retreated when they tried to surround her. Tony Garcia flew in a zigzag pattern that made no tactical sense, drawing enemy fighters away from their assigned positions. The Catherian pilots had never seen anything like this. For thousands of years, they had fought enemies who moved in predictable formations. Every species they had conquered fought with logic and order. But the humans were doing everything wrong, and somehow it was working. On the bridge of the Catherian flagship, Supreme Commander Victor watched the tactical display with growing confusion. The small group of human fighters was now following any attack pattern he recognized. "Analysis," Victor demanded from his tactical officer. "Unknown, Supreme Commander," the officer replied. "Their movements appear random. They attack and retreat without purpose. It makes no strategic sense." "All ships maintain formation," Victor ordered. "Do not be drawn away by these chaotic movements." But it was too late. Catherian ships were already breaking formation to chase Jake's fighters. The perfect coordination that had made them unbeatable was falling apart as ship captains tried to respond to attacks that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Jake saw his chance. While the enemy fighters were scattered and confused, he led his squadron straight at the largest Catherian command ship. Its shields were down because the escort vessels had moved away to chase other targets. "Now," Jake called out. "Hit them with everything." The wildcard squadron struck the command ship from 6 different directions at once. Explosions tore through its hull as the vessel's coordination systems failed. Without their primary command ship, the Catherian fleet began to lose the perfect timing that made their tactics so effective. But Jake wasn't finished. "Megan, can you hack into their communication systems?" "Working on it," Megan Phillips replied. From her fighter's electronic warfare station. "Their encryption is tough, but I think I can create some interference." "Do it. Flood their channels with noise. Make it impossible for them to coordinate." As Megan's electronic attacks disrupted Catherian communications, Jake led his squadron to attack the secondary command ships. Each successful strike created more chaos in the enemy formation. The effect spread like wildfire. Human ships that had been retreating suddenly found the enemy attacks becoming disorganized. Captain after captain began to notice that the Catherians were no longer moving with their usual perfect coordination. "All ships," Admiral Turner's voice came over the radio. "The enemy formation is breaking down. All units, attack at will." For the first time in the battle, human ships began to gain the upper hand. Without their perfect coordination, the Catherians were just another fleet, and not necessarily a better one than the humans. But the victory at Centauri was only the beginning. Word of Jake's tactics spread through human space faster than any official military communication. Ship captains who had been losing battles for months suddenly had new hope. Captain Roy Jackson of the cruiser Defiant tried Jake's chaos tactics against a Catherian patrol fleet near the Vega system. Instead of forming a traditional battle line, Jackson's ships attacked from random directions, constantly changing course and target priorities. The Catherian patrol was destroyed in less than an hour. Commander Sarah White used similar tactics to defend the mining colony at Proxima Centauri. Her small defense force scattered in all directions when the Catherians attacked, then regrouped to hit the enemy command ships when they were least expected. Another victory for human unpredictability, but the real surprise came from the alien species that the Catherians had conquered long ago. They had been watching the human victories with great interest. On the water world of Thalassa, the aquatic beings called the Thalassans received reports of human tactics through their spy networks. For 300 years they had been slaves of the Catherian Empire, forced to provide resources and soldiers for the conquerors. Commander Reef Singer Nine Depths called together the secret resistance leaders in the deep ocean trenches where Catherian sensors could not reach. "The humans have found a way to defeat the perfect formations," Nine Depths announced to the gathered Thalassans. "They fight with chaos instead of order. They ignore the rules that have kept us enslaved." "Can we do the same?" asked another Thalassan. "Leader, we can try," Nine Depths replied. "Our people are naturally unpredictable in the water. Maybe that's an advantage we never realized we had." 3 days later, the Thalassan resistance struck at Catherian shipping lanes using tactics they had learned from studying human battle reports. Instead of attacking in organized formations, Thalassan submarines appeared from random directions, struck quickly, and disappeared into the ocean depths. The Catherian response fleet found nothing but empty water and destroyed supply ships. Similar rebellions began throughout the galaxy. The insectoid Skarn developed swarm tactics based on human chaos theory. Instead of their traditional hive formations, individual Skarn fighters acted independently, creating patterns that even they couldn't predict. The Catherian fleet sent to stop them was overwhelmed by millions of unpredictable attackers. Machine intelligence known as the Nexus incorporated randomness algorithms into their battle computers. For the first time in their existence, the Nexus ships fought with programmed chaos, making decisions that even their own artificial intelligence couldn't predict in advance. On Earth, General Grant watched the reports flooding in from across the galaxy. His secret experiment with the Wildcard Squadron had grown into a galactic revolution. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're receiving victory reports from 17 different systems. All of them are using variations of Morrison's chaos tactics." "And the Catherian response?" Grant asked. "They're struggling to adapt. Their entire military philosophy is based on perfect coordination and predictable responses. They don't know how to fight an enemy that refuses to follow logical patterns." But Grant was worried. He had studied military history long enough to know that chaos was a dangerous weapon. Once unleashed, it was difficult to control. His fears proved correct when reports began arriving of conflicts between the newly liberated species. The Thalassans and the Skarn, both using chaotic tactics they had learned from humans, began fighting each other over territory in the Rigel sector. Ancient grievances that had been suppressed under Catherian rule exploded into violence. Jake, now promoted to colonel and commanding a full Chaos Warfare division, received the reports while stationed at the new human base on Kepler Station. His tactics had freed dozens of worlds from Catherian control, but they had also created new problems. The Nexus and the Vorthok are at war, Megan reported during their daily briefing. They're both using chaos tactics, but they're using them against each other instead of the Catherians. The liberated systems are forming competing alliances, Tony added. Some want to join the human coalition, others want independence, and a few are trying to create their own mini-empires. Jake stared at the galactic map on his office wall. Red zones marked areas of conflict, and there were far too many of them. He had wanted to free the galaxy from Catherian tyranny, but he was beginning to realize that freedom and chaos were not the same thing. "Colonel," Danny said quietly, "maybe we've created a bigger problem than we solved." Jake nodded slowly. "Maybe. We have. The question is, what do we do about it?" Outside the station's windows, the stars looked the same as always. But Jake knew that among those distant suns, entire civilizations were learning to fight with the chaos he had taught them. The fire he had started was spreading across the galaxy, and he was no longer sure he could control where it burned. 2 years had passed since Jake's victory at Centauri, and the galaxy was burning. Not from Catherian conquest, but from the chaos that Jake had unleashed. In his office aboard the massive space station Harmony base, Admiral Jake Morrison looked at reports that made his stomach turn. The Thalassans and Skarn had been fighting for 8 months over water rights in the Rigel system. Both sides used chaos tactics, making the conflict impossible to predict or stop. Millions had died, and entire planets were becoming uninhabitable. "Admiral," his aide Captain Kelly Wright announced, "General Grant is here for the emergency meeting." Jake stood up as Grant entered, followed by Danny Price, who now commanded the assault fleets, Nina Brooks, who oversaw planetary defense, Tony Garcia, who led intelligence operations, and Megan Phillips, who coordinated communications between dozens of species. "The situation is getting worse," Grant said without ceremony. "The Nexus has declared war on 3 different organic species. The Vorthok are raiding human colonies because they think we betrayed them. And the Meridians are using telepathic chaos tactics that are driving entire populations insane." Jake sank back into his chair. "How many conflicts are active right now?" 47 separate wars across 31 systems, Megan reported. "All of them using variations of chaos warfare. Trade routes are destroyed, diplomatic relations are breaking down, and refugee populations are fleeing in all directions. We taught the galaxy how to fight without rules," Danny said grimly. "Now nobody knows how to stop fighting." Tony pulled up a holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Most of the map was colored red, indicating active conflicts. "The irony is that we defeated the Catherians so completely that they're no longer a threat. Their empire collapsed 18 months ago. But the species we liberated are now destroying each other." Jake had been dreading this moment for months. He had received reports that the remnants of the Catherian military were regrouping somewhere in the Outer Rim territories. But these weren't the same Catherians that humanity had originally fought. "There's something else," Grant said. "Our long-range scouts have detected a large fleet moving toward the Sol system. It's definitely Catherian, but they're using new tactics." "New tactics?" Jake asked. "They've been studying our chaos warfare methods," Megan explained. "According to our intelligence, they've spent the last 2 years learning how to combine their traditional coordination with human unpredictability." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "They've adapted." "Worse than that," Grant replied. "They've improved." Their new Supreme Commander is someone called Thekvar the Adaptive. He's taken everything that made them strong before and combined it with everything we taught the galaxy about chaos. Jake stood up and walked to the large window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those distant lights, an enemy was approaching that combined the worst aspects of order and chaos. The Catherians had learned from their defeat and were coming back stronger than ever. How long until they reach Earth? Jake asked. 6 weeks, Tony replied. Maybe less if they use the new jump technology our spies say they've developed. What forces do we have to defend Earth? Jake asked. That's the problem, Danny said. Most of our chaos warfare fleets are scattered across the galaxy, trying to stop the various conflicts we helped create. We can recall them, but it would take months to coordinate a proper defense. Jake turned back to face his team. These were the people who had followed him from the beginning, who had helped him change the nature of galactic warfare. Now they were all looking to him to solve the problem they had created together. We need a new approach, Jake said. The old chaos tactics won't work against Catherians who have learned to use chaos themselves. What do you suggest? Grant asked. Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything that had happened since he first ignored orders at the Coat Academy. We need to create something new. Something that combines chaos and order in a way that even the adapted Catherians can't predict. Over the next 3 weeks, Jake worked with his team to develop what they called controlled chaos doctrine. Instead of pure unpredictability, human forces would use carefully planned chaos that appeared random but actually followed hidden patterns. Nina designed new weapon systems that could switch between multiple attack modes in mid-battle. Tony created communication protocols that used chaos theory to encrypt messages in ways that appeared random but could be decoded by human commanders who knew the hidden patterns. Megan developed electronic warfare systems that could jam enemy coordination while maintaining human command structure through quantum encrypted channels. But the real breakthrough came when Jake realized that humanity's greatest advantage wasn't chaos itself, but the ability to switch between order and chaos as needed. We don't fight with pure chaos or pure order, Jake explained to the assembled fleet commanders. We fight with adaptive strategy. When the enemy expects chaos, we give them order. When they expect order, we give them chaos. We stay one step ahead by never doing the same thing twice. The Catherian fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system exactly 6 weeks after the first warning. Jake watched from the bridge of his flagship, the newly constructed Harmony, as the enemy formation approached. There were fewer ships than in their original empire, but these vessels were clearly more advanced. Incoming transmission, Megan announced. The main screen showed a Catherian commander unlike any Jake had seen before. Instead of the rigid posture of traditional Catherian officers, this one moved with fluid grace that suggested adaptability. I am Supreme Commander Thekvar, the alien said. We have come to reclaim our empire and eliminate the chaos plague that humanity has spread across the galaxy. This is Admiral Morrison of the Terran Defense Force, Jake replied. You're not welcome in this system. Admiral Morrison, Thekvar said with what might have been a smile. The architect of galactic chaos. We have studied your tactics extensively. Your unpredictability will not save you this time. The transmission ended and Jake turned to his crew. All ships, prepare for battle. Remember, we're not fighting the old Catherians. These ones have learned from us. The battle that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. The Catherians attacked with a combination of their traditional coordination and human-inspired chaos tactics. But Jake's forces responded with adaptive strategy, switching between different tactical approaches faster than the enemy could react. When the Catherians used chaos swarms, Jake's fleet formed disciplined defensive lines. When they tried traditional formations, human ships scattered and attacked from unpredictable angles. Most importantly, Jake's forces maintained communication and coordination, even while appearing to fight chaotically. The turning point came when Jake realized that the adapted Catherians had one weakness. They had learned to use chaos, but they had never learned to live with it. Their society was still based on rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience. When their tactics failed, they couldn't adapt quickly enough to try something completely different. All ships, Jake ordered, switched to pure improvisation mode. No set tactics, no predetermined responses. Fight like humans. The result was beautiful in its unpredictability. Human ships fought with creativity and intuition that no military academy could teach. Pilots made split-second decisions based on gut instinct. Captains used tactics they invented on the spot. Engineers jury-rigged weapon systems in ways that violated every safety protocol. The Catherians, despite their adaptations, couldn't respond to this level of pure human creativity. Their fleet broke apart and retreated to the outer system, but Jake didn't pursue them. Instead, he opened a communication channel to Supreme Commander Thekvar. "Commander," Jake said, "I have a proposal. You wish to negotiate surrender?" Thekvar asked. "I want to offer you a choice," Jake replied. "You can keep fighting and eventually lose, because no amount of adaptation can match pure human creativity. Or you can help us solve the real problem, which is, the galaxy is tearing itself apart because everyone learned to fight with chaos, but nobody learned when to stop fighting. Your people understand order and coordination. Our people understand adaptation and creativity. Maybe it's time we worked together to bring some balance back to the galaxy." The conversation that followed lasted for hours. In the end, Thekvar agreed to what became known as the Harmony Accords. The remaining Catherian forces would join with humanity to create a new galactic peacekeeping organization, combining human adaptability with Catherian organizational skills. 5 years later, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Galactic Peacekeeping Station Alpha, watching ships from dozens of species working together to maintain order in their sector of space. The galaxy was still chaotic, but it was a controlled chaos that allowed for growth and progress instead of endless destruction. Danny approached and stood beside him. "Any regrets?" Jake thought about the question for a long moment. "I regret the wars that my tactics caused. I regret the lives lost because I taught the galaxy how to fight. But I don't regret freeing everyone from tyranny. So what's next?" Danny asked. Jake smiled as he watched a mixed crew of humans and former Catherians working together to repair a damaged trading vessel.